An input screen will display on the UI using a banner for the title of what's expected, as well as an input field for the user to actually pass in a string to our own visual novel. Today begins the start of interactions within the visual novel, and an interaction is any form of input provided by a user that will in one way or another affect the visual novel being presented. Our focus today is an input screen where the player can provide their own string to the VN. Let's get right to it by creating the layout of the screen. I'll start with a panel to be the screen itself, and every other part of it will be held as a child of this panel. Secondly, I want a sub-panel which will act as the root. We need a root to disable and enable everything without ceasing the use of any coroutines attached to the main input screen. Now I'll just disable the image component on the input screen so it isn't used as a raycast target, and blocks our chapter advancement triggerer, but I will leave the image turned on in the root because when the input field shows up, I want that to take precedence, but I'll just set its alpha to 0 so it's invisible. Next we need our banner and title, which will display an instruction or something when the input field shows up. Make sure it's parented to the root, and I'm just going to call it my title header. Now scale it to a size and shape you deem appropriate, and set its anchors to make sure it stays in place and relative to the current size. Something like that's good for me. It's not too big and it's not too small either. Now just give it an image or color to make it more appealing. Next, we need the text that will overlay the banner. This will be the instruction, or the title, telling the player what is expected to be put in this input field. Alright, that looks decent enough, so now I'll set my anchors and make sure this thing is nice. Good, so that's our title header. Simple, but it'll do the job. Next, we need the input field. Let's grab the TM Pro version rather than the regular, and set it somewhere along the middle of our screen. Again, make sure this is parented to the root, and then just find a location that looks good for it. And that right there might be a little low, so I'm going to raise that up a tad bit. Alright, that's better. Next, just anchor it in place. So now, by disabling or enabling the root rather than the input screen, we control the visibility of all the sub-elements. And the placement of my input screen is directly in front of the speech panel, so it's always in front of any dialogue. And now comes the fun part of making it work. Let's go ahead and jump into our core scripts, and let's make a directory for the input screen as well as the choice screen. We'll cover adding choices in the next episode. Inside, make a script for the input screen. Then we'll also want a script to control the title and header. Entering the title header script first, we'll program the appearance of a header to accompany both the input and choice menus. Make sure to use the Unity Engine UI and TM Pro namespace because we will be using elements from those namespaces. Then give yourself the reference to both the banner image as well as the title text. I'm also going to add a shorthand get set for the text on the title. Or maybe just a get. I'm probably not going to set it from this value. Actually, you know what? I may as well. You never know. I never know anyway. I always do. I do crazy stuff. Now let's give ourselves different options for revealing the title. My three options are to instantly set it, to slowly fade in, or to gradually build it character by character. These methods are our display methods, and we'll select one or another using an enumeration. Below this, I'll make the variable called display method and give it a default of instant, so anytime I call for a header to show above the input field, it's going to default instantly show it. Also, we might want to control the speed of the reveal, such as if we use slow fade. Just how slow should it be? That's what this variable will define, so make a float for the revelation speed and give it something like 1 to start off with. Now remove start and update because we aren't going to be using those, and let's go ahead and get started. We should have two functions to call on a header: show to reveal the title, and hide to hide it. If we show it, then we'll use a coroutine to gradually introduce it based off of our display method. This will be called revealing, and I'll go ahead and add my usual references to go along with it. I have a reference to the coroutine instance, and a boolean of is revealing to let me know the status of the header. So let's start with hiding. If we're currently revealing it per a show request, then terminate the process and set it to null. That way we don't try to access two revealing coroutines at one time. Then just disable the banner and the title so that they don't show later on if we decide not to use a header. Showing is a different story. First of all, we want a string to set as our title. This string will display overhead of the input field, so it might be important in most cases. Let's start by setting the title text to this value. Then let's copy the existing revelation's termination from the hide command and just paste it here. But this time, instead of ensuring that it's null, let's assign it to a new instance of the revelation coroutine. Okay, so now let's make it work. Obviously, if the banner and title are disabled in hide, then we want to enable them once we begin a display. Next, we have to reveal the title based off of our display method. In order to do this, I'm going to use a switch to handle each case. One for instant, slow fade, and then I will also do one for the typewriter style. So for instant, it should instantly be assigned and visible. The title is already set and the components are already enabled, so we just have to make sure that each element's alpha is 100%. Remember, this is through the global functions, so we can set that by calling globalf.setAlpha. Told you guys that global functions would be pretty useful, because now we're able to call it from literally anything, and that makes it very easy to do here. Next is slow fade, which means even though the components are enabled and the title is already set, they should gradually become visible. This again affects the alpha of these elements, moving from 0 to 1 based off of our revelation speed. So the first thing we do, obviously I have instantly set the alpha to 0 so that they're invisible, and now I'm just looping until the color changes and they are fully visible in the scene. Then use setAlpha, globalf.setAlpha, and math.moveTowards to move the value from 0 all the way to 1. The maximum 1, give it our speed, and multiply it by time.unscaled delta time. This is a timescale independent delta time, meaning that even if timescale is used to pause the game, a title can still be introduced and used. And just set the alpha of the title to the banner's new current alpha. So now both of these two, since I'm assigning it to the banner's alpha, they should have an equal visibility. Alright, and that is slow fade. Last is our typewriter style. Let's again start by ensuring the alpha of both elements are at full. And typewriter is going to be very easy to implement thanks to our lovely text architect. Make a new architect, giving it the title text and the title string as the target. And you know architect is just going to go to town on it automatically, so all we have to do is yield until it's no longer constructing. Alright, great, so those are our display methods. If you think of any more, go ahead and add them in, but I'm moving on to end the coroutine. By this point, our title is fully revealed, and I can set the coroutine instance to null and terminate it. And I believe that completes the title header. Looks like it. Yeah, okay. So now we can jump into Unity and enter the input screen. That was actually pretty quick, wasn't it? Alright, the input screen is going to need the UI and TMPro namespaces as well, but we're also going to want a static instance, so take a moment now to include all of that. Okay, it wouldn't be an input screen without an input field, so let's add a TMPro input field variable up here. And we'll assign the one on the screen that we made earlier, right here through the editor. Then to quickly get the text, I'll make a static reference to the text within that input field, so I can get it directly from the input screen class, without needing an instance reference. Has to be static for this, of course, can't forget that. Now give the screen its own title header of the script we just created. That'll allow us to set a banner and title for the input screen. Additionally, make a reference to the root of the screen. Now let's remove start and update and create a show and hide method in their place, both of which will be static. And from awake, make sure we hide immediately so we can have the input screen visible in the editor, but disappear until we call it once the game actually starts. For it to hide, the root needs to be deactivated, so set it to false. Then we should also hide the header in case hide is called while the header is being revealed. So we want it to hide both of the hide the root and stop the header from being created. So when we show, let's give the option of having the title or not. Then a boolean to clear the current contents of the field, and the default will be true. So let's start by ensuring the root is active in the scene. And since this is static, we need to go get the root through referencing the instance. Then if we do clear the current data, set the input field's text to be an empty string. Then let's show a title header only if a title is provided. This way we have the option of using a header or not. If we have a title, simply show the header, and if we don't, then we're just going to hide the header. I always like giving myself the option of being able to do something as opposed to being forced to do the same thing. Yes, I said that very eloquently. Lovely. Now let's make the coroutine for revealing the input field. And I don't want it to be public, so I'll just make it static, or even private static. I'll use the same variables as usual though, only the boolean will be publicly accessible. But this boolean is going to be of a different name. I'm going to call it is waiting for user input, and it'll return true only if the root is active, meaning the input field is visible and it's waiting for the player to input something. Come to think of it, I may as well make the is revealing boolean too. I mean, why not? I'm already here. It'll just make my job that much easier. So is revealing only true if revealing is not null. Now back in show, if we are currently revealing, stop it and start a new revelation. This revelation is going to be very simple. Set the input field to be inactive so it's only visible once the header finishes displaying, if we have a header at all. Loop and yield for as long as the header revelation takes by monitoring the isRevealing boolean. After the header's done, let's go ahead and reveal that input field. And then set the coroutine to null, so we're done revealing. And that's it. Now it's time to apply it in Unity. And I apologize, during the editing I noticed that my recorder cut out when I created another function in the input screen. I must have fat-fingered the pause hotkey on accident. Not to worry, it's only one very small function. This function is called accept, and all it does is it simply calls hide to stop any revelation and confirm the current text of the input field as the accepted user text. It's not public and not static, so we can call it from the input screen's instance, thus allowing us to also call it from events triggered on the UI, if ever we choose to do that with a button or so. Such as if you have an accept button below the input field, an on-click could trigger accept. Okay, and Unity has thrown me some errors. These errors occurred because I didn't reference the instance for certain variables in my static functions. Whenever I call the header in a static function, since it's a non-static variable, I have to reference it through the instance. Making that correction clears my issue, and hopefully none of you have persistent issues at this point either. So let's make this a usable input screen by adding the input screen and title header components to it. Now let's assign those variables. Expand the input screen and activate the root so we know what we're dealing with. So this here is our title and banner. We need the input field, which is directly below them, so let's assign that real quick. And the header is a child of root, but the script is on the input screen, so assign itself to that slot, and then put the root below it. Now we can place the banner and text into a header class. So that would be title header for the banner, and then the Text Mesh Pro instance for the text. And here we could set our display method as well. You can see that. Make sure you save your scene for good measure, and then let's proceed to make a testing script and watch the input screen in action. So let's go into the testing folder here, and go ahead and make a new C# script for testing the input screen. What's especially nice about this input screen is it's effortless to use. The only variable we need, and really we don't even need it because it's optional, is the title. Then in Update, if I press one key, then I want to open the input field and enter some information. So if I press keycode.alpha1, which happens to be the key that I'm going for, alpha1, then to open the input screen, I only have to call inputscreen.show. And pass in my display title, since I can set it from this testing class. Then if I press enter while the input screen is waiting for input, I will call accept to accept the input provided. That's actually the return key. So we know the input screen is waiting for user input when the boolean is waiting for user input is true. So inputscreen.isWaiting for user input. Let's make sure that that is true while we check for the return key. And if it is, then we just say inputscreen.instance.accept. And that will close it out. And to show how we can use the data given, I'm just going to print whatever it is I entered into that field. Remember that the data input into the input screen is fetched through the string called currentInput. This can be retrieved while the input screen is open, or even after it's closed, as I'm doing after accept, which we know closes the input screen and hides everything. Great, so that will open the screen and allow me to accept and acknowledge input. Sounds like a pretty good test to me, so all we need to do is just check and make sure nothing is missing. Alright, yeah. Alright, so with what we have, I believe that should work just fine. Now we need to add the tester script to our object, give it some question, what is your name, and then let's go ahead and start Unity. So if we start, it's disabled, and press 1 and it appears with my question inside the banner. I input Avira as the name. Let's clear that out real quick. And yes, enter. So accept closes it, and it acknowledges it saying I provided Avira as the input. So let's give it a new title, What's Up? And there we go. There's the new title. Nothing much. Enter. And I provided nothing much. Now, if I want no banner above the input field, I just give it an empty title. See how that works? Pretty easy. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I am pretty happy about that. I think that's a pretty decent input screen. Yeah, and I'm giving it a weird input because clearly without a title and no dialogue, how am I supposed to know what to enter there? But having that option is nice for a banner or not. Alright, now I'm going to scale the screen up just to make sure everything's anchored properly and scales appropriately. Alright, looks like everything but the text in the input field is scaling great. I also want it positioned in the middle center as well. I just think that'll look a lot better. So adjust the text to suit your desires, and I'm going to use our previously made adaptive text instead of best fit because I don't want it resizing while I'm typing. That would be very unattractive. Before we say goodbye, let's see how the different display methods give our input screen different introductions. Let's start with the basic instant display. This pops the banner up immediately, so there's no delay at all between the banner and the input field being brought into the screen. As soon as it's called, the input field becomes available to us, and that on its own is a nice aspect of instant. Then there's slow fade. Slow fade is a gentler and more appealing view since it's not suddenly in your face. With this method, we wait until the header is completely visible before we make the input field accessible. And apparently my space key triggered another testing script, because now I got Avira talking to me. But whatever. Next is Typewriter Style. This method makes the banner instantly visible, but the text gradually forms the title as the text architect constructs the string. By all means, make some more display method. And here's a little test for you. I want someone to make a display method for a floating slow fade, where we float the banner from a lower position to its default, while at the same time transitioning its alpha to 100%. This is an effect that I've seen in several visual novels. At least a lot of them that I've played, this is the most prominent one that I've seen. I think it looked pretty cool. So I'll develop it and present it at the start of our next episode, but I want you guys to attempt it on your own so you can really get a feel for how you can make your own custom display methods. And of course, speaking of the next episode, we will be covering adding a choice screen to our visual novel, where we'll be presented with a choice and one-to-many dynamic options to choose from. Again, just like the input screen, adding choices to our visual novel will also be surprisingly easy. Before anyone asks, yes, we will be incorporating input and choices into our chapter files, but that'll come after we've programmed the mechanics for both. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please drop it a like below. I welcome you to subscribe if you're new, and stay tuned as we dive deeper into making our story more dynamic.